cleanser of the mess I've made. Your boundless love for me portrayed, with patience for my learning curve, by holding back what I deserve.
Hi, we're glad you've joined us again. This is our third lesson in our special series on Street Level Messiah. So far, we've talked about the Messiah, Jesus, making himself available to man. And then last week, we talked about him being authentic. He was real and genuine, and we can identify with those characteristics. Today, we're going to introduce another topic. We're going to talk about him being compassionate. Then we're going to throw it back to you so that in your small groups, you can discuss this among yourselves. You know, Dan, as we look at this, the idea of compassion, I think all of us greatly appreciate it, and it seems that some people really have a bend toward that. My mother could watch something on TV and tear up over it, just a newscast, and feel real compassion. But others don't seem to show it as much, don't seem to feel it as much. They seem to struggle with compassion. I don't know, is it pride? Is it complacency, selfishness? What do you think?
Is this a personal attack on, are you trying to say something with this lesson, Jody, or?
Trying to aim right at you with what we're talking about.
No, here's why I love these studies. This one really, I love studying about Jesus, but this one hits me right where I am, because I'm going to tell you, it's not natural for me. I don't have that natural bent. But the challenge of this lesson is it's not okay to just say, well, that's not me.
Right.
I have to work on it. So I'm not sure what it is. Is it selfishness? Is it fear? There's a lot of different reasons, but what I learned from Jesus is there's just no excuse not to do better at it.
Yeah, and I think it also sometimes this lesson, as well as what we'll talk about next week when we look at another aspect, that sometimes they're not even thought of as being a manly characteristic or quality.
Sure.
To be compassionate. It's kind of like, no, men are not that way. They're going to be a rough and tumble, gruff kind of person. But what I want you to do on your handout is turn it over this time and look down toward on the bottom of the back page under the further study section. I want to pull out this one incident in the life of Jesus with the widow of Nain. It's in Luke chapter 7, beginning at verse 11. And I think this shows such a beautiful picture of the compassion of Jesus. Beginning at verse 11, now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. Now, to me, this is just a beautiful picture of his compassion, because Jesus is traveling, and so it's not necessarily within his plans to do this. There's a huge gathering or group of people who are traveling with him, moving, and it seems they just kind of happenstance on this funeral procession coming out of the city. It's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of desperation that's pictured in this story. First of all, she's a widow.
Right.
And a funeral's bad enough, but this is her only son. And I don't know in this culture, how she's going to make a living, how is she going to take care of herself. There's all of these issues. This is devastating. This is crushing. And so for Jesus just to stop a funeral procession, that had to feel good.
Well, just in and of itself, that was such an odd arrangement of somebody coming up to and stopping a funeral procession. And then, to me, it's kind of remarkable that his first words are to the mother, and he just says, "Do not weep," or "Don't cry," which would seem absolutely bizarre. He is the most out-of-touch man there could be, is how it would have to have been perceived. This is a funeral. This is my son. What do you mean, don't cry? And yet he he has more to say because he's not just telling her, hey, don't worry about it. He stops, he raises her son back to life, and it would have had to have just been her whole world turned around in just a moment of time. And how she must have felt just moments before, she's weeping, and now because Jesus shows compassion, he raises her son back to life, and he instantly changes her world. It's just amazing to me. Now, as you go in your small groups, again, what we're trying to encourage you to do is not just the study, but it's the association together. It's also the idea of opening up, sharing what your thoughts are, diving into some of these things. Now, we didn't touch and talk about Jesus and the leper. That's what we want you to do, as well as maybe share some of your thoughts about this widow of Nain. Look at those questions on your handout, discuss those things, and then we'll come back in a few minutes and talk about the rest. Welcome back. We're glad you're a part of this series, and as we continue on, we're going to talk about this compassion at a different level. We're going to move from the one-on-one aspect of Jesus showing compassion to the widow of Nain, and as you did in your groups, talk about Jesus and the leper. We're going to move this street-level Messiah now just from the one-on-one out to this large multitude of people. And we're looking at Matthew chapters 9 and 10. So it's a big section of Scripture, and as you look at that, Dan, pull out a few things that you feel are important or be helpful for the discussion as you kind of unpack that a little bit.
All right, let's just start by reading in verse 35. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion, because they were weary and scattered, like sheep having no shepherd. So the text, as you said, is moved from the one-on-one examples of compassion, and now Jesus is looking at a multitude. And one of the things that this lesson challenges me with is it's super easy for me to rush to judgment. And you can watch the news and see groups of protesters.
Right.
You can go to the mall. I'm kind of a people watcher, and it's so easy, and I fight the natural tendency to rush to judgment and to criticize or just in my mind. And what we have the example here of Jesus, rather than, man, what a bunch of lost people. What a bunch of, they got this wrong, they got wrong. Instead, he sees their brokenness, their lostness, and he's moved with compassion by it. That's a challenging kind of example for me to look at.
Well, and the other thing in that too, just struck me as you were talking about that, as you read that and talked about that, is this lostness and the aspects of the compassion he's showing. All those offenses of those people were actually against him personally. And that's not on his mind at this moment. What he's looking at is, as you say, they're lost, they're scattered, they're wandering, they don't even know which way to go. And rather than just writing them off as a bunch of losers, he shows his compassion to them and on them. And it's impressive to see how he goes from the one now to this whole large group.
Sure, well, and it even continues beyond that in the text. He transitions in verse 37. He says to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." What does he mean by that? How does that relate to what he just said about seeing the multitude?
What it seems to me is that he's looking at this huge group of people and realizes it's bigger than he is going to be, in the sense that he won't be around forever, in the sense of here on this earth. I don't even think it's even so much that just the taking care of the diseases and all,
Sure,
but their lostness. And he sees that and says, there needs to be more workers. It's huge. It's beyond the ability of right here and right now. I guess from that I see him asking them, now pray about this, that there's more workers that will come into this scene.
Well, I guess what it challenges me with then is, again, you said it's not just Jesus. He didn't want to be the only compassionate person.
Right.
In fact, as you start in chapter 10 and verse 1, he empowers them to now go show his compassion to others. And, I guess that comes home to us it challenges me to start seeing people differently. that I need to, rather than rushing to judgment, I need to rush to this heart of compassion and think, how can I help? And what can I do to show compassion in this instance?
Well, and that is, I mean, that is so much harder to do. And it's the easy thing. I agree with you. It's easy to look at a situation and just kind of back away from it, of these poor saps, what are they doing with their life, and looking at it in that way, rather than to say, wow, what might I be able to do to help out in this situation? And you know, the picture is not real pretty in the rest of this in chapter 10. He looks at it and says, you're going to have a hard time. There's going to be persecution. And I guess if I transition that now to me, to you, that when we show compassion, it's not always going to be easy. It's not always we're going to get the pat on the back because we did something compassionate. We may face just the exact opposite of that.
Sure.
So, some tough things. Okay, that does it for us. That's our part of this, and we're letting you listen in a little bit on our discussion as we look at these things together. So now it's your turn. Go into your group, talk about these things, look at these questions, give some of your thoughts and discussion, and then make sure, as we've tried to emphasize before, don't skip over that box section. That's really where the power of these lessons come into it, of saying, what can you personally do to change to be more like Jesus? This street level Messiah, show the compassion that he shows. Thanks for joining us. Hope that you have a great discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
How wonderful your mercy is. How awesome